Welcome to ZOOMERTIMES TV. And here's your host, Anita Finley.
Hello, folks. I know that everybody's kind of staying close to home and you wear your masks, but I'm Anita Finley, and I'm the publisher of Boomer Times and your host for Zoomer Times. And I want to remind you that there are places you can go as long as you're masked. One place that is really good is the Delray Marketplace. It's out there on West Atlantic. They have great shops. They have great things to interest you with. So please get that on your calendar. Go to the Delray Marketplace and look in Boomer Times and you'll see everything about it. Okay, now we're going to have our famous celebrity writer, Darwin Porter, who is going to talk to us about something I have no idea, but it's always so exciting. We never have enough time. Welcome, Darwin. And he's calling in from, or he's viewing in from Staten Island in New York. Hello, Darwin.
Hello, Anita. It's delightful to see you again. And
Always.
as you've talked about down in Florida, I'll fly down right away. It sounds enticing. Well, here I am, and I'm going to talk about a subject that is dear to both of our hearts, and it's about baby boomers.
Okay.
And there's a little background here. They've influenced my life in amazing ways, and they do so today because they've remained my chief readers of my biographies, but we go way back. And historians by the dozens are now recording life in the later 20th century. And here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is that baby boomers brought middle-class living to an all-time high, unheard of in the world. They changed the world. No nation had ever really had a middle class. Like the beginning of American century, you were either rich, which was a minority, or you were very poor, often working on the farm, or 14-year-olds working in factories. And then the baby boomers came along. In the United States, not in Europe, the years were 1946, and that was the year that brought us Hillary Rodham and Donald James Trump to launch the baby boom era. And
Oh my.
it more or less ended in 1964. But originally they weren't called baby boomers. They weren't called baby boomers until November of 1963. So what were they called? Well, shockwave was one of them. My favorite is baby pig in the python. Of course, that's a metaphor. The metaphor was the python was America, and the baby pig was all the baby boomers that the python couldn't swallow, because in 1946, I think condom sales were at an all-time low. Babies started popping up all over in every state of the union. And the infrastructure, they talk about it today, but back then it was a disaster because nothing had been done since the beginning of the war. Took up all, hospitals, schools, and suddenly the United States is overflowing with all these babies all over the place. And yet they arose to this powerful time in America. To have lived through it has been a great honor for me. And I want to make this very personal about baby boomers and me. I know you have certainly running the best baby boomer magazine in America. You know a lot about it, but so I'll make it personal. I was walking up Flagler Street, which I hope is still named Flagler Street.
It is so far, yes.
Miami, and I was going to the library in the Bayfront Park to research a paper. And along the way, I saw a wire rack, and they had copies of a book called Europe on $5 a Day. I was stunned. The idea had, I grew up in a world where only rich people went to Europe, which was the case more or less before the war. So I forgot about my paper, at the library. I went to the Bayfront Park with a copy of this book. I sat down on a park bench and read it in one long afternoon. And now this is the miracle. 18 months later, I came out with a book authorized by Arthur Frommer called England on $5 a Day. And so what I did, I made a deal that Frommer did the capitals of Europe, but I said, these baby boomers are growing up, they'll be getting out of school and college, and they will want to explore a country, not just do the usual, Rome, Paris, Florence, London, and they'll want to see the country. And so he said, well, you start doing the country books on $5 a day. And I did. And my greatest moment was to arrive in Spain on a July day. It was filled with American college students. And these were very young baby boomers who decided they're going to Europe. And nearly out of 3 or 4, nearly everyone had my book on Spain. It was the great day of my life. Of course,
Darwin, wait, I want to interrupt you. I'm sure that's true, but could people really live on $5 a day and travel?
well, back then, it didn't pertain to transportation. Of course, there were bargains galore. I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. There was a little boarding house in Brighton that for $23 a week gave you room and 3 meals for 23 American dollars. And the dollar after the war was called the God Almighty dollar. And yes, of course, when I had to do Scandinavia was most expensive. It was $5 and $10 a day. But the point is, the baby boomers started traveling. They changed the world. Of course, there were problems. The Vietnam War, the fight of civil rights, the sexual revolution that some people opposed and some people enjoyed very much. I don't know which category you fell in. We won't go there. And but then something happened. Baby boomers finished college and they started going to work. And suddenly they didn't need $5 a day. They were going into moderate hotels. Some baby boomers began to take over companies. Maybe their father or grandfather retired and they were going deluxe. So I came up with an idea to stay in the business, to do what became the first Frommer guide. Remember, they were called $1 a day. Would you believe it? The Frommer people opposed the title originally. They said, we're not well known enough. And I said, you'll get well known. Let's call it the Frommer Guides and do something that no one had done before. Do deluxe, moderate, and budget. And that will give people a choice of travel. Well, as you know, they became the most successful travel books in the world. And Frommer sold to Paramount. And Paramount owned Simon & Schuster. They started assigning me territory. Books were selling. And of course, if something sells, publishers want more copies. And I ended up, the territory stretched from North Greenland to the Sahara Desert. And then they gave me the Caribbean. I know you've been all through the Caribbean, all those islands down there. The baby boomers built them up. For example, I arrived in Anguilla. There were 2 little horrible inns with chickens running around. And then just within years, deluxe hotels. So baby boomers transformed. I did a book on the Bahamas. I arrived on islands in the Bahamas at the airport. There was no one at the airport. And you come back a few years later and their hotel, of course, Bermuda was established more. So Bermuda, being British, was much more built up. And then it just started to expand, of course, and the job lasted till 2013. You know, the internet came along to more or less kill the travel books. But of course, by then I had switched to Hollywood biographies. And according to a little survey my distributor did, it's baby boomers who are my chief readers. So I have this really first it was the travel books and now the biographies, but they've been my most faithful readers and I've been their greatest supporters.
So Darwin Porter, I'm going to stop you because I want everyone to know who you are. Darwin Porter, as you know, writes a column for Boomer Times, has for many years. He is, I think, the foremost celebrity writer in the world, and he has articles and books that no one really has any knowledge of. I mean, they didn't have knowledge before he wrote it, and he's telling you, I knew you were creative, but I didn't realize that you actually, I knew you wrote for them. I didn't know you started the ideas. You do have tremendous creative ability. So I applaud you for that. And of course, you're no spring chicken like I'm not, and we're about the same age, and you just keep going like the energetic, like the ever ready bunny. You never stop, do you?
I did want to give the idea I started. It was really Fromer that started that Europe on $5 a day. I mean, that really started it. I wrote the first Fromer guides that were, but I mean, the real start was that startling title that sort of opened up Europe. And that's what baby boomers did. They began, in other words, the idea that you don't have to wait till you're 65 or 70 to travel. You can start traveling. And then it really changed the world. And also, I didn't want to just confine myself to Europe or the Caribbean. And so what happened, all these airlines started inviting me. And then the business was growing so big that Simon & Schuster hired your friend and my publisher today, Danforth Prince. And he came in at a time I desperately needed help. He spoke French, and he seemed to arrive in a country and picked up the language, at least on a rudimentary level, like I've never seen before, a real linguist. And that helped him get through many a situation. And also, I really then got to see the world, including, as I said, the North Pole down to, I stood on the cliffs at Patagonia and watched out to the end. I came to the end of the world. I wanted to see everything. I went to Africa and I went to countries that no longer exist called Upper Volta. And you will not believe this, but Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan were tourist countries. We were doing books on places, and now you might go in there and not necessarily come out alive. And then Beirut was called the Paris. I'm talking about when baby boomer. Beirut was called the Paris of the Middle East. And now I hear that Lebanon is in total disarray. So many places are in disarray. So another reason that historians are pointing up to baby boomers being a glorious era when they were young or into middle age is because the world was so different now. And I won't even go into, unless you want me to, the futurists. The futurists I first met in Hawaii, they're hired by the government to predict what is going to happen in the future. I used to rent a home there in Honolulu, owned by someone you may remember called Jane Russell. She was the pre-Marilyn Monroe. Yeah. And the futurists, the great grandchildren or the grandchildren of baby boomers do not think that they will live in a world as good as their parents lived in. And
do you believe that too, Darwin?
Yes, I do indeed, because the more I read about it, first, they believe that pandemics, I don't mean the current ones, are here to stay. The water level rising 8 feet will have enormous complications. Or they think like Greece and Turkey are on fire now, as is California. It's just, there will be droughts. New York has had the greatest summer in history, but I mean, in the sense of rainfall and wonderful weather. But this New England, New York has been an exception. Uh, Futurists say even unpolluted water could become a great commodity. The fish may disappear from the Mediterranean. I don't want to sound so gloomy, but I mean, you did ask the question, and
Right.
it's oh, and population. All right, so let's say 1/4 of the people are at least starving to death in the world today. So double that. 1/2 of the world may be starving to death. Double that by the end of the 21st century, 20th century, 3/4 of the people in the world. Now, that will be intolerable. So that may be a case of the haves fighting off the have-nots. I mean, it's really going to be a very difficult time, and we won't be around to see it. So that's why I'm looking back on this glory age that I lived through and experienced. It was just not travel. It's the baby boomers in all art forms rose to new, I mean, the ballet, just take the ballet. I got to hang out with Rudolph Nureyev and Margot Fontaine. And in Miami, I never went to a modern dance concert. And then I'm getting to meet Martha Graham. By the way, I may save this for another day. My doorway into all these people, I was befriended by 14 famous women because unlike most young men of my age, I dated older women. I have a great appreciation of older women, and 14 was just the number I come to mind. But I found even after their careers were over, like Lana Turner, they need a young man to take them places. They didn't want to arrive at this spectacular gala. And also, I was making good money, and my company had a limousine 24 hours a day. I could take them in a limousine and many women were giving their boy $200 because they didn't want to be seen paying the check. Of course, at most of these galas, there were no check, but I found that these people virtually, if you're very famous, like Tallulah Bankhead, well, Tallulah Bankhead lived across the street from Eleanor Roosevelt. And when you arrived at Tallulah Bankhead, you often encountered Eleanor Roosevelt. Let me give you an example about the art going on. I was in Rome doing Frommer's Rome, and I'd been long a friend of Tennessee Williams. And he said, would you drive Shelley Winters and me to see the Spoleto Festival? Of course I would. And brilliant, brilliant festival. They had festivals all over. And at the end of the festival, Tennessee said, Shelley and I are going to fly to Milano. We're going to return to New York. Would you drive Ingrid Bergman back to Rome? And I said, Ingrid Bergman, I will drive back to Rome. Well, we became great friends. And when I did Frommer Sweden, I met with Ingrid Bergman, and she helped give me a direction of what Americans might want to see and do in Sweden, her native Sweden. So it was just a wonderful time of these fabulous people coming and going in my life, including, other than you, the woman that I considered the most elegant woman who ever lived on the face of the earth. Shall I name her?
Sure.
Miss Joan Fontaine.
Yes.
She just didn't. She was Olivia de Havilland's. Olivia de Havilland hated me, but maybe because I was too close to. She hated Joan Fontaine, her sister, but it was just fabulous what we could go to, and also baby boomers were staging these wonderful things in every art form. For example, in Miami, I would never think of going to hear a violin concert. We just didn't do that. I went to violin concerts. I went to hear a pianist. The only pianist I would have gone to was Liberace, but he was more showman than piano player.
So wait, so let me ask you, did you see these at the Olympia Theater? Where did you see these concerts?
Oh, around the world.
No, when you said in Miami, where did you see?
No, I didn't see these. I said I did not. I
Oh,
did. No,
okay.
I never. I had. I was familiar with motion pictures, and I'd met a lot of famous people: Jack and Jackie, Eleanor Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra. You know, my mother worked for Sophie Tucker on Miami Beach. And that was a wonderful time too, because it was called the golden age of Miami Beach. I think I saw you there.
Yeah, right.
and but then I realized through these wonderful women that I met, who introduced me practically to the world, they broadened my horizon. And many baby boomers were doing. Listen, these concerts and things were not filled just with famous people. They were filled with baby boomers. Baby boomers came to appreciate all the arts. In the early, their grandparents, it was only the rich who did these things, but baby boomers provided the audience for fabulous people who came along. They supported dance troupes. Oh, I met this opera star named Maria Callas. And I'll be very frank, in Miami, I had never attended an opera. And suddenly I'm meeting these opera stars. And I was just saying, these older women took me under their wing, and I was a cultural illiterate, except for film. I really was up on film. And I went along with the baby boomers, and we discovered these wonderful artistic achievements that were great.
So let me ask you another question. So in the United States, were the concerts only in New York, or were they in San Francisco? What cities could you have attended these?
Every major city in America, Chicago, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Denver, Dallas. It was the baby boom. To me, they were the greatest people who ever lived, because they brought culture to America that it had never seen before, except in pockets, as you mentioned, the pocket being New York, not even Los Angeles. Los Angeles was a late comer, but New York, you had to be rich and you had to live in New York. And the baby boomers then spread it. And then baby boomers started all these wonderful festivals. Could be anywhere. Upper New York State, they started having these festivals. So I felt an honor to have lived through this. I'm not dead yet, but I felt an honor to have lived through this expansion. I know I sound like an enthusiastic kid talking about it, but it was wonderful for me to, first I found like you became interested in the art form, like Martha Graham. Suddenly she explained to me what modern dance was about. And suddenly I was putting up money for the Alvin Ailey dance troupe. Today, Alvin Ailey has a street named after him in New York. He's dead now, has his dance troupe and even a building. But back then he had $18 a week to live on. I mean, it was a different time. And I was so happy to play a part in it, and to welcome my dear baby boomers whom I've been living off ever since.
But let me ask you a question. Isn't it because their parents wanted them to go to the universities and become real professionals? And you said that before, and that's what opened their eyes, right?
Yes, it was the parents. The parents, for example, it was sort of a rare privilege to go to college. And then suddenly it became not so unusual to go to college. And there were scholarships provided. Some people decided to work their way through college. And but getting a college education back in the 20s and 30s was not necessarily, it was, well, many people went, but it was for the privileged. And the baby boomers changed all that. It was like, don't just stop in high school, go on and broaden your horizon and go on to college. And for example, actually, I probably could have afforded it myself, but it was Senator George Smathers who got me a delicious scholarship. He was the senator from Florida.
Yes, a very good senator, yes.
Yes, and I liked him very much. And he was the best friend of Jack Kennedy, not Jackie. Jackie didn't like him because he and her husband would go off on, shall we say, little trips to Havana, but we won't go into that. And but Smathers was wonderful. I don't know if you ever got to meet him.
No, but I did know about him. But let me also throw in the fact that when the veterans came in, they were able to go to colleges for free.
Yes, this was the great thing. I mean, they were not necessarily, baby boomers, but the young men often returning from World War II, some of them had not even finished high school. And then the government then opened up college. In fact, when I attended college, many of the men were 28 years old. You know, they'd fought, well, I started to say fought with John Wayne on the sands of Iwo Jima, except the secret was John Wayne didn't fight in World War II, only on the screen. But you know what I mean.
Yes.
And so they opened that program up. And for example, I don't know how much time we have, but
probably another 5 minutes, maybe.
Well, I'll just tell you very briefly. I may do this. I knew movies, but what I decided, my mother gave me the New York Times since I was 13. I was reading about this woman called Lucille Ball. I didn't know who in the hell she was. She brought Threepenny Opera to America. You may have heard the hit song Mac the Knife by Bobby Darin, and Lada Linya was the star. And she was doing these wonderful plays that never made it to Broadway. And I flew with some people from the University of Miami, and we were trying to get her to bring those things to Miami. I said, it could be presented at the University of Miami. I said, the people of Miami would definitely go for this. Well, she wouldn't leave New York. Lucille, I adored her. Her husband virtually invented cigarette paper. So she had multi-million. Before that, men rolled their own cigarettes. And so she was a great patron of the arts. And she said, well, you're coming to New York. She says, kid, you know nothing about the theater. So I'll show you what theater is all about. I mean, she just sort of, a Jewish mama just sort of adopted me. And it was just one thing after another. She said, they're sort of breaking up, but I'm having Laurence Olivier and Vivian Leigh for dinner. Would you like to join us? And I said, you mean Hamlet and Scarlett O'Hara? I'll be there. And she said, my best friend is Helen Hayes. And she's up in Nyack, and I've invited to my country home, but I don't want her to, I have a chauffeur going, but she needs someone to go with her and escort her. Would you go to Nyack and ride back in the chauffeur and spend the weekend with Helen and me? So there began my world of Helen Hayes, who was one of 3 women vying for the title of First Lady of the American Theater. But these women, I know a lot of young men my age, they wanted a cute Marilyn Monroe lookalike, but I found these women were enriching. The stories that Helen Hayes would sit and tell on a summer night in Connecticut were wonderful. And I got just a liberal arts education, but I think my real education began when I arrived in New York and started meeting all these people. And in fact, when I went to pick up Vivian Lee and take her to Lucille Ball, she said, I've accepted this invitation, but for dinner, but who in the hell is Lucille Ball? And then I explained. And then my greatest achievement was I got Tennessee Williams to meet Lortel, and she produced some of his experimental plays that were not finished.
Really?
So I made a little small contribution,
You know, as you're talking, Darwin, it's interesting that I would kill to have someone like you in my life, could be a younger person, who would do for me what all these women did for you, because so many women are sophisticated and they're just usurping everything they can get. They're like a sponge. And yet a lot of men didn't have not only not your intelligence, but also not your loving ways, and you're so charismatic. So you did a lot for them. I'm sure if I had them and I was interviewing them, the ones who are alive and the ones who aren't alive, they would say this about you, that you provided something that they really wanted, someone that they could trust, someone that they could communicate with. So don't ever put yourself into a different position that you always did it, and they loved it. No, they loved you for who you are. You know that.
Oh, well, yes, but I'll tell you, Lana Turner was very frank. I love that about her. She said, well, we're going out tonight, but I'll tell you frankly, that's because Clark Gable, Errol Flynn, and Tyrone Power are no longer calling. I mean, that could sound like a put down, but I didn't interpret. I didn't interpret as such. So it was a wonderful time. I'm glad that baby boomers are going to be in the history books, because they were unique in the world. And the sad thing is we may never see the likes of that generation.
Well, and we are just now out of time, but I have to tell you that being an optimistic person, I think there's still a lot of good that's going to happen somehow. I just believe, even though we're facing a lot of this, if you look back at history 500 years ago, we're still in great shape. We just have to get our earth back in shape. That's the most important thing. But I so love your articles. I so love your coming on I was going to say radio. It's our Zoomer Times TV. And Darwin, we just want you to take care of yourself, and I love you so much, and I appreciate everything you do for us, really. And, and of course, Dan Forth too, can't leave him out. He's a very important part of this partnership.
I want to thank you for publishing that Boomer Times. I think you're doing a very important service, and particularly to the people of Florida. And
thank you.
You should be honored for that.
Thank you so much, Darwin. And we'll talk to you again. I want to say goodbye to both of you, and appreciate you so much. And stay well, stay happy, and don't go to that big New York festival, please. That's dangerous.
I will not be there. Good.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
and
everybody.
Stay well. Stay well.
Goodbye, Darwin Porter.
Goodbye.